rural and local governments, and also he was secretary of rural development and Panchayat Raj of Karnataka state. So although he's originally from Kerala, his most IAS career was in Karnataka. So Karnataka is his home. After taking voluntary retirement from IAS, he was part of Janagraha a few years ago. He led this I Paid a Bribe initiative, which crowdsourced reports on corruption from citizens. After IAS, he also worked with many Indian states directly with the panchayats and their advisory associations, including Kerala, West Bengal, and also he worked on. He was an advisor to State Planning Board in Karnataka, and he has been consultant on anti-corruption and decentralization not only in India, outside also. In 11 countries, including Nepal, Mongolia, Bangladesh, and Switzerland, and many other countries. He was also a consultant for the 14th and 15th Finance Commission. He has a very career, and we are lucky to have him conduct this series. And in fact, I wanted to tell a little bit about his family. His wife Aditi was also in the government. She was finance director of KPDCL, and she was also former accountant general West Bengal. And his son is also has an interest career. He's a naturalist and wildlife researcher and wildlife photographer. He spends most of his time in Peru and Amazon forest. And a little bit of introduction about this discussion that that we are going to have now. This is not the first one. This is the 10th discussion in this series over the last 2 months. He has conducted separate sessions in Kannada and English. He has already talked about, gave a session on introduction to key institutions, history of urban local governance, on 74th Amendment, on KMC Act, and a couple of sessions on people's participation, and also important institutions in Bangalore city. Last week, earlier this week, he conducted a session on BBMP budget on income side. There will be more sessions on BBMP budget on the expenditure side. And today we are going to be we are going to have a session about duties of a BBMP corporator. So we will be organizing several more in this series. And I want to say that thank you, sir. We are lucky to have your session. Lucky to have somebody like you train us or conduct these workshops for us. Welcome again, and welcome all. I think now we can get started.
Thank you, Shantala. It's always a privilege to be in the training sessions organized by the Aam Aadmi Party. As Shantala said, I have been associated with the AAP for the last 5-6 years, and we used to do face-to-face sessions on training. They were not about the BBMP. It was largely about how the constitution is designed, how does the constitution function, what is democratic decentralization, and what is corruption. The idea of doing this series of lectures, of talks on the BBMP started just before the lockdown was announced. Shantala is actually leading the effort. And our idea was to reach out to more than 1,000 people across Bangalore. Bangalore has 198 wards and elections were imminent. Of course, we don't know whether the elections are going to be held because of the COVID crisis. But the idea was that we would reach out to more than 1,000 people, on an average about 5 corporator or councillor aspirants from the AAP in every ward. The idea was to give them a snapshot of what they are to expect as people who stand for elections from the AAP and who wish to deliver excellent governance. This is the 9th session in the series. It is numbered 8 because I did the 9th session earlier this week on finances, and we held back this session so that we would get greater participation. This is a session that would be assumed would elicit a greater interest, and that's why it's being held on today. Today is a Saturday. I'll share the presentation and we'll start. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes, sir, we can see it.
Okay, right. Thank you, Janice. So Namaste, namaskar, namaskara. I will be speaking in English in this session, but मैं हिंदी में भी बात कर सकता हूँ और कन्नड़दಲ್ಲಿಯೂ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. Malayalam samsarika. So at different times, depending on the audience, we will be delivering. I mean, I hope to deliver this lecture in other languages also. But this is for a wide audience. Not everybody is from Bangalore, and so it will be delivered largely in English. Uh, we speak in this presentation of the duties of a counselor, or what is known as a corporator. It depends upon what they're called. In Karnataka, we refer to them as corporators, but actually the law says counselor. And the constitution also uses the word counselor, so counselor is the correct term. As Shantala said, we had organized this training program, and these were the 8 previous programs that were conducted, which is serial number 1 to 7, and 9, which was conducted last Tuesday, which was on the revenues of the BBMP. And today we are doing the presentation on number 8, duties of a corporator. So the idea is to take people who have a very hazy idea about what governance is, right from the fundamental building blocks of what is governance, through the history of urban local government in India, the salient features of the 74th Amendment, which is a bedrock for urban governance, the salient features of Karnataka's Municipal Corporations Act. As you know, every state has a different act. Then the whole idea of people's participation. We thought we will do one presentation, but it became so interesting that we split it into 2 parts. One is to understand the concept, and the other is to understand how it is structured and what are the issues relating to people's participation, impediments, etc. in Bangalore city. Bangalore city, like most other cities, have a confusing array of institutions which overlap with each other. So we had a very interesting presentation on the important institutions in Bangalore city and how they interact with each other, how they collaborate, how they hamper each other's work, and that was done. And then we got into the finances and the duties of a corporator. So in every presentation, one likes to present a set of learning objectives. So the learning objectives here are that you will be able to describe the constitutional provisions relating to urban elected representatives, to urban local governments, describe the roles of the councillor under the Karnataka Municipal Corporations Act, and list out some of the important issues regarding the role of the councillors, because there are many issues in Karnataka's law which are thought-provoking, which may actually either give an opportunity to a corporator or a councillor to work, or impede the councillor from his work, his or her work. 30 minutes is what I intend to spend on the presentation. Maybe I will do it a little slower, and then we will throw open the discussion for, throw open the presentation for discussions. There are a lot of people today, so we expect to have a good, feedback on the presentation. So let me just look at the constitutional provisions. The Constitution speaks about elected representatives in municipalities in Article 243R of the Constitution. So what it says, and this is a very important thing, it says that every individual elected to a municipality shall be chosen by direct election from territorial constituencies. So this is a direct election. It's a first past the post system. There is no proportionate representation. Why I say this is, in other countries, even local government elections are based on proportionate representation, but in India, we have a single system that applies to elections for panchayats, municipalities, state governments, and to the Lok Sabha, which is that elections are directly from territorial constituencies. And for this purpose, in a municipality, all municipal areas shall be divided into territorial constituencies, which are known as wards. That is mentioned specifically in the Constitution. But in addition to this, the Constitution is also conscious of the fact that there is necessity to give ex officio representation to some people. Personally, I am not in favor of this. I think that any body has to be by and large representative, but that was not the way the Constitution was designed. And I've spoken to Mr. K.C. Shivaramakrishnan, the late Mr. Shivaramakrishnan, who was the Secretary Urban Development when the amendment was discussed in the late 80s and early 90s. And there was a feeling that in order to have some kind of an organic linkage between, assemblies, parliaments, and the municipal area, there has to be some kind of ex officio representation. So we have a provision in the constitution, that is 243R2, which gives leeway to the state government to provide representation in a municipality for people who have special knowledge. But the constitution itself is very clear that those people who are nominated on account of their special knowledge shall not have a voting power in the meetings of the municipality. They cannot vote. Experts cannot vote in the municipality. It does not say the same thing about other nominated members, which include the Lok Sabha MP, the Rajya Sabha MPs, and the MLAs and the MLCs. The MLCs and Rajya Sabha MPs need not, because they may not represent constituencies per se, they are from the state, and MLCs represent certain interest groups. But if they are registered as electors within the municipal area of Bangalore, then they become ex officio members of the Bangalore BBMP. Chairpersons of committees constituted under clause 5 of article 243S. Now this is a very important provision, because on the panchayat side, the government does not have any power under the constitution to constitute committees other than the panchayat. However, in the urban areas, there is this very important exception made in article 243S(5), which says that the state government can constitute committees other than ward committees. And if such committees are constituted, they may have outsiders who come in as members or even chairpersons, and such chairpersons also become members of the BBMP. Of course, in our system, we do not have that provision, but the constitution provides for it. So what you see is a municipality that is not really in a representative sense completely autonomous, but it is representative to a large extent. But the constitution itself envisages that people who have special knowledge can be co-opted, but they will not vote. And other elected representatives who sit in parliament and who sit in the state assembly or the state council or the Rajya Sabha can come in, and they are represented as ex officio representatives, and chairpersons of committees constituted under clause 5 of article 243S, which is the scope given to government to create other committees other than municipalities, will also become ex officio members of the municipality. So this is what the constitution says. But what are the powers and responsibilities of the councillors under the KMC Act, the Karnataka Municipal Corporations Act 1976? A very important point to be noted here, and this is the case in many other states, is that when the Constitution 73rd Amendment was passed, almost every state went ahead and enacted a fresh Panchayati Raj Act. If you, except for a very few states, most states, Karnataka was one of the first, but if you check up, most states have gone ahead and they rewrote their entire act and came up with a new act. In fact, on the Panchayat side, UP is one of the rare exceptions, because UP still today uses the Uttar Pradesh Panchayat, United Provinces Panchayati Raj Act of 1948, which was there even before UP was formed as a state. But that's an exception. But funnily enough, in urban areas, many of the states, including Karnataka, did not pass a new legislation. And to my mind, that was a bad idea, because the constitution really created a paradigm shift in how urban governance was to be organized. But Karnataka has persisted with a few amendments here and there with the 1976 Act. And in an earlier presentation, I made out the case that it's high time that we actually rewrote the KMC Act. It has 400 sections. Many of the sections are redundant. They don't need to find a place in a law of this nature. The law has to be very crisp. It should be easily organized. It should be easily read. But today the act is so large and so spread out, and it goes into unnecessary detail on so many things. In fact, funnily enough, the KMC Act 1976 still talks about provisions relating to smallpox, but smallpox is gone. Of course, who knows, we need to just replace the word smallpox with corona. But the fact of the matter is that smallpox is still mentioned in the KMC Act 1976, even though smallpox itself was officially extinguished in the late 70s. So that is how, sometimes obsolete the act is. But we have to deal with this act unless it is amended. Now, one of the important things in the KMC Act 1976 is that it speaks about municipal authorities. There is a whole chapter, chapter 3, which is devoted to municipal authorities. Now, what are the municipal authorities? Who are the municipal authorities? And it mentions only 3 institutions as municipal authorities: the corporation, the standing committees, and the commissioner. Very important. It also lists the commissioner as a municipal authority. But it doesn't list out the mayor or the deputy mayor as municipal authorities, and it doesn't list out the corporator or councillor as a municipal authority. So now let us look at what these municipal authorities are and who is doing what in the city corporation. Now let us look at the city corporation per se. The corporation under the law is supposed to have no more than 200 councillors. So we have 198 councillors because we have 198 wards at the moment, plus 10% of the councillors who can be experts, who can be nominated as permitted in the constitution, but without voting rights. Councillors are to have a 5-year term and take an oath swearing allegiance to the constitution. And there are elaborate provisions on the do's and don'ts of elections of councillors, how not to, what constitutes a corrupt electoral practice, what are irregularities, how the election process has to be conducted, all of which are included in the single act. There are also very, very detailed provisions governing the election of councillors as mayors and deputy mayors who head and preside over the BBMP council per se. The mayor and deputy mayor are not designated as municipal authorities. In fact, recently there is an amendment proposed to the act to designate the mayor as a municipal authority. That is still not enacted and it is under consideration. There is also a practice of rotation for the change of mayors. When the constitution permits, for the purpose of inclusive governance, the constitution has created an elaborate system by which the positions of chairpersons of elected local governments, either municipalities or panchayats, have to be rotated so that every community gets a chance, particularly the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe people and women get a chance to be represented and to hold on to leadership positions in the panchayats and in the municipalities. And of course, the constitution has also said that this the leeway should be given to the state government to make similar provisions for the adequate representation of backward communities and minorities in leadership positions. The constitution says that the terms may be rotated or there can be a rotation for every term. But the interesting thing in the constitution is that the constitution does not define the length of a term. Now, for a reasonable human being, the length of a term means the term of the body, and the body is in position for 5 years, but that is not how Karnataka has seen it. And Karnataka has implemented a bad practice of rotating the mayor's positions and even the standing committee chairperson's positions, standing committee membership positions every year. Every year, all the standing committees change, all the standing committee chairpersons change, all the mayors change. And I think it's a terrible practice. It's a bad practice, and it has been done in the name of inclusive governance. But what it does is it just converts the whole municipal system into a merry-go-round, into a musical chairs. Nobody sits in the chair for long enough to gain experience. And when people have a term of only 1 year, there is no incentive to do anything that is long term. And I think that this has been deliberately done in order to prevent competition, political competition rising from the city corporations to challenge the MLAs and the ministers. So they keep the people who are elected to the local governments in a constant state of circulation. And you know, a rolling stone gathers no moss. So people don't gain experience. 5 years are over before they know what is happening. And then a fresh bunch of people get elected. So this is a bad practice. Leadership doesn't emerge this way. We must remember that many leaders of our country have cut their teeth in municipal administration. I don't know whether many people know about this, but Jawaharlal Nehru's only administrative experience before he became the Prime Minister of the country was as Mayor of the Allahabad City Corporation. He was Mayor of the Allahabad City Corporation, and then his next elected office, where he held executive authority, was as Prime Minister of the country. We have countless examples of people subsequently also who started their careers in municipal governance and then who have gone on to become even chief ministers. So this is a nursery for political growth. But if you keep people rotating every 1 year, and they have to constantly change their positions, then they hardly are there long enough to learn anything. So this is a bad practice in my opinion. In the panchayat side, I was member of a committee in Karnataka where we strongly recommended that this practice should be done away with, and it was done away with. It was the term of the panchayat president was converted from 20 months to 5 years, but very sadly, just before the lockdown, there was an ordinance passed and it was reconverted back to 20 months, which is a very sad thing. That's not the way to nurture political talent. Now let's look at the powers and functions of the mayor, because after all, the mayor is also a corporator. The mayor has some interesting powers. He presides over every meeting of the corporation. He has general powers of inspection and giving direction to the commissioner on implementation of any corporation or standing committee resolution. And the commissioner shall comply with such directions. This is a very, very important provision. So a strong mayor even today can command and get action out of a commissioner. The problem is that the mayor changes every year. In fact, I have been an advocate of, I am not personally an advocate of a direct election of a mayor, because I think that the law is strong enough to ensure that a mayor can command and control and supervise the actions of the commissioner. Because the law says the commissioner shall comply with the directions of the mayor in the implementation of any decision of the corporation or standing committee resolution. The mayor has also got powers to call for any corporation record. He or she can call for any corporation record, and of course the mayor can delegate some of the powers to the deputy mayor, and the deputy mayor can act for the mayor in the latter's absence. The deputy mayor can also direct the commissioner to get administration and audit reports. This is an important point. So the deputy mayor veers towards getting administration and audit reports prepared, and he doesn't have to wait for the mayor to delegate the power to him. This is the original power. And of course, the deputy mayor carries out delegated functions. But there's an interesting point here. The mayor cannot be a chairperson of any standing committee. So there is a sense of a distributed leadership. There are standing committees which are quite strong. I will come to that later on. And the council is headed by the mayor. But the mayor cannot be part of a standing committee because the mayor cannot recommend to the council something as a chairperson of a standing committee. So there is a bit of a distributed leadership within the system, which is a good thing in my opinion. Now these are the standing committees. These are described in section 11, listed out in section 11, and their duties and powers and responsibilities are given in elaborate detail in section 61A, which has been often amended and changed. So we have 12 standing committees: taxation and finance, public health, town planning and improvement, major public works, ward level public works, accounts, education, social justice, appeals, horticulture, markets and establishment and administrative reforms. And all the work of the city corporation is subdivided into actionable points by the standing committees. The standing committees are quite powerful and quite autonomous in a sense. They have a lot of power to take up actions independently, because after all the council only meets once in a while, every month or so, whereas the standing committees can have more frequent meetings. Now the standing committees in Bangalore city comprise of 11 members each. Here there is a system of proportionate representation by means of a single transferable vote. So depending upon the number of members of different parties in the council, the standing committee membership is also appropriately assigned to different standing committees. All members are members of one or the other standing committee. No councillor can be a member of two standing committees. But the unfortunate thing is that they are rotated every year. So one might be standing committee member in health this year, then you will go off to accounts, then you will go to major public works. So it doesn't again allow people to specialize or settle down in any one area, which is a bad thing. The mayor and deputy mayor can walk into any standing committee meeting, but as I said, they do not have the right to vote in any standing committee meeting. They can observe, they can speak, they are invitees, but they cannot vote in a standing committee meeting. So there is a sense of a distributed leadership, a separation of the mayor and the deputy mayor from the day-to-day work of the standing committees. The commissioner, as I said, this is very unusual that we speak about three municipal authorities. That is the city corporation per se, which comprises of 198 people plus the MLAs and the MLCs and the nominated members. We have the standing committees. They are bodies, but here you see the commissioner is an individual. So the commissioner is to be appointed by the government after consultation with the mayor, ordinarily to hold office for a period of 2 years, and shall be removed from office if the corporation dissolves by a 2/3 majority. It has never happened so far, but this power is there. Now the interesting thing is that the commissioner, the law does not say that the commissioner should be a government officer. The law does not say that the commissioner should be a government officer. But this is where the IAS has played a very nice trick, because the IAS has a separate system of what they call encadrement. Encadrement is like doing a reservation of a railway ticket. The seat is reserved. So that encadrement process, the IAS has reserved the city corporation commissioner's position as an IAS post. But strictly speaking, the law doesn't make it an IAS post. And I've always been arguing that the day might come one day when it is advertised. And the best person, an expert, may be picked from the market and given a proper contract. Because we have seen when IAS officers are posted, they often don't show allegiance to the elected body, but they show allegiance to the state government, which has actually posted them on deputation to the city corporation. So the law here is quite powerful, but we have not practiced it in a powerful way. The commissioner has a wide range of ordinary and extraordinary powers of execution, inspection, and reporting. I will not go into them in great detail because it goes into very, very detailed provisions about what the commissioner can do in an obstruction, what the commissioner does for public health, what the commissioner does for road construction, what the commissioner does in the case of a medical emergency. All this is listed out in the act in elaborate detail. So the structure is that people get elected. The people who get elected are not executives. The mayor may be a quasi-executive, but the execution is done by a bureaucracy that is chaired by a commissioner. And this is a very traditional way of organizing the execution side of the government. And this hasn't changed since 1976. So we might say that the paradigm itself is quite old. We probably need to change it to make it much more professional, but we haven't done it so far. So that is where the law stands at the moment. Now here is my reflection on municipal authorities. As I said, the councillor is not a municipal authority, but the standing committee of which the councillors are members are municipal authorities. And similarly, mayors and deputy mayors are not municipal authorities, but the entire council is a municipal authority. And the only individual position which is considered as a municipal authority is the commissioner, but the commissioner is duty bound to obey the mayor. So there are checks and balances. Even the commissioner at one level, you might think that the commissioner can do whatever he or she pleases, but actually the law also says that the commissioner shall do what the mayor asks the commissioner to do. So now let us come to the question of what are the powers and responsibilities of the councillors under the KMC Act. There is one section. This is section 70. The section 70 says any council, very widely stated. Please read this and please read the portions that are underlined. See, why I am showing you the law is ultimately in India and in any other country for that matter, the law matters. The law matters. You know, when I used to work in the field, you know, there are different parts of Karnataka where different political styles are there. So, you know, I worked in a district called Hassan, where just pretty much like the wild west of Karnataka. So what would happen is that people who came from the plains areas of Hassan, would shout and they would yell and there would be a lot of dramatics in our meeting and all that. But as an officer who could, if I wanted to manipulate them, it was easy in the sense that I would concede a few things, laugh with them, give them a coffee and talk to them, and then they'd say, fine sir, you do what you want, and I could get away doing what I wanted. But the people who came from the west coast or high up in the hills, very soft spoken, but you couldn't get your way with them because they carried their law books with them. And if you mention something and you propose something, they will say, sir, can you please explain under which section of the law? Here is a book. Please explain to me under which section of the law you can do this. And that is why you find that there's a different culture of functioning, in different parts of Karnataka. There's a lot of trust in officers, and officers can bend the law. In some places, they're not questioned. But if you go to the coastal area of Karnataka, you cannot fool anybody. Everybody knows the law. They come to the office with a book and they ask you to point out, and they will insist on getting their rights through the book, which makes sense to me. That's the right way to go ahead. So that's why I'm drawing attention to the law. Any councillor may draw the attention of the proper authority to any neglect in the execution of corporation work, any waste of corporation property, or the wants of any locality, and may suggest any improvements. How many times I have used the word any? Any improvement, any locality, any waste, any neglect, and draw attention to the proper authority. So the scope of the councillor to draw attention of the proper authority is very wide. But can the councillor step in and do something? Not according to the law. The law does not give execution powers to the councillor, but the law gives intermediation powers to the councillor. The councillor can go around roving eye, check everything and report, aggregate public grievances, list out things very proactively. He or she can do anything other than execution. Right? And also the councillor shall have the right to interpellate. Now, I've never heard the word interpellate. It almost seems like Shashi Tharoor has drafted this law. But interpellate is intervene on matters connected with the corporation administration. So that's also a very wide power given to the councillor. So the councillor is essentially seen as a representative of the people, the eyes and ears of the people, and therefore the representative of the people and wide scope for representation of any matter. It doesn't even say that the councillor will talk only about his or her constituency. I, as a councillor, can talk about the needs of some other constituency if I want to, because I may be interested in that ward by way of being a member of a standing committee. And suppose I am in charge in the standing committee, I am chairperson of the health standing committee. I am in charge of health from the BBMP for the entire Bangalore municipal area, not only for my ward. So the law is at a pretty well drafted, and my opinion is that it should be left as it is. This should be as wide as it is. The only question that you need to ask is, does the councillor need to have executive authority? Is the councillor also an authority, a municipal authority? Actually, can the councillor go and execute something? And this is a question that worldwide I find that there are different approaches. In many places, this is what they do, but in many other places, the councillor acts like a local executive. He or she actually does the work, executes contracts, signs checks, and gets work done. This is an interesting point that one could talk about later on. There were some very important provisions that were introduced into the Karnataka law in 2011. And the context was that in 2005, the then UPA 1 government introduced the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, JNNURM. And when JNNURM was initiated, actually a lot of the work on JNNURM, a lot of the policy work, a lot of civil society organizations from across the country participated in the design of the program. And from Bangalore, Janagraha was suggested to the government that we should make people's participation processes a conditionality before JNNURM money is given. And so there was something called a Nagara Raj bill, which kind of took the good practices from rural areas on people's participation and said we must create systems and energize people's participation, because though ward committee is mentioned in the constitution, no action had been taken for 20 years. Karnataka, surprisingly, because Karnataka has got a decent Panchayat Raj system and the culture of participation is reasonably good and compared to many other states. But for some reason, the state resisted the introduction of people's participatory processes in urban areas. So finally, Government of India in 2011 in UPA 2 period said, sorry, we are not going to give you money. We are not going to give you money unless you enact provisions to give life to people's participation processes. So what do? They enacted section 13B, 2H and so on. They introduced a complete elaborate section into the law. So under this provision, the councillor was given additional powers, which is very interesting. What were these powers? Under section 13D, the councillor was authorized to nominate the area sabha representatives within 90 days of constitution of the corporation. And the area sabha representative's term was to be coterminous with that of the councillor. Not a good practice in my opinion. I think the original idea in the representative system for area sabhas was that the area sabha would have a footprint of maybe 1 polling booth or 2 polling booths, so 2000 votes or 1000 votes, and they would elect the area sabha representatives. So Bangalore has a very large number of polling booths. There would be that many area sabha representatives who were elected, so the councillor did not have any role. That was how the Government of India envisaged the system would be in the framework law. But unfortunately, Karnataka said that the councillor will nominate the area sabha representative. And the worst thing was that if the councillor lost his position, then the area sabha representative would also lose his position, which was, I mean, making the link between the two so obvious as a spoiled system that which is completely undesirable. Now, tomorrow, if unfortunately, God forbid, the councillor passes away, the area sabha representative has to be changed. It's almost as if the councillor was putting his personal secretary as the area sabha representative, and that is what has happened in, I mean, of course, not in area sabhas, because area sabhas unfortunately are yet to be constituted. But this culture of patronage of the councillor appointing his or her special cronies as members is something that has been documented in Bangalore by many civil society organizations. It's well documented and it's pretty much of a scandal. The chairperson of the ward committee, the councillor is automatically the chairperson of the ward committee. This is a very big representative, a very big step forward. So the councillor is not only now running around collecting information from people, aggregating it and passing it on to the council, but the councillor is also chairperson of the ward committee, and the ward committee is supposed to prepare a development plan. So in a sense, the councillor becomes the chair of the authority that is preparing the plan. But then, sadly, in Karnataka, they also introduced a very regressive law. They said that the ward committee decisions can be vetoed by the councillor. That is not being done by any state. Yet in Karnataka, we passed a law. It still exists in the books. It has not been removed. Civil society organizations are completely against it, and in my opinion, for good reason. This is something that completely violates the spirit of distributed leadership and public participation. What's the point of participating if after all that participation the councillor says, no, I veto this and my decision is final? That's what the law says. It says that if the councillor vetoes it, there's no appeal. Such decisions will be binding. That is, I think, quite regressive. It is quite unnecessary, but be that as it may, today the councillor has a somewhat slightly more executive authority as chairperson of the ward committee, because the ward committee is supposed to prepare the ward development plan. So where we stand now is that the councillor has powers of responsibilities of participation and involvement in council decisions, participation and involvement in standing committee activities and decisions, general powers to intercede under section 70 as I described, and very strong powers to control, modulate, even obstruct people's participation. So the councillor today has the power to be either a devil or an angel. The law is not an impediment for the councillor to become an angel, but the law also does not prevent the councillor from becoming a devil. But why should we imagine that they will become devils, right? Let us look at the corporator as an angel. The corporator as an angel, what can a corporator or a commissioner or a councillor do as an angel? First of all, being an angel starts from before becoming a councillor. He or she can run a clean election campaign with no bribing, no intimidation, no violence, no false voting. He or she can get election funding transparently. He and she can prepare a ward level manifesto. There will be a party level manifesto, but a ward level manifesto is very important. After all, a ward is not a very large area, and a ward level manifesto can be prepared. The councillor can document all the expenses incurred on elections and publish in accordance with the law. There is an obligation under the law that every councillor must regularly file assets and liability statement. The councillor should do that, can do that. And one very important point is that the councillor shall always disclose interests in corporation contracts and stay away from conflicts of interest. That is the true measure of honesty, to say that, listen, I am not coming into this contract because my brother-in-law or my husband is involved in this contract, and so I am staying away. Now you take a decision. I mean, it's not fair also that our relatives should stay away from contracts. Some of them might be genuinely in the business of doing contracts, but the more important thing is, if we become councillors, we disclose our interests. Like in a corporate system, many of you work in corporate, so you understand it. Again, the corporator as angel, a very important thing is, let the corporator use the leeway given to appoint a person in the area sabha, make that process transparent. The manner of selecting the area sabha representative can be made transparent. A study was recently done by a civil society organization in Bangalore, which showed that regular ward committee meetings were not being held. After a great deal of fighting through High Court directions, ward committees were constituted, but meetings were not being held. So the councillor can definitely ensure that regular ward committees are held. They are held transparently and democratically. They are held open. Anybody can come and sit there with a full disclosure on implementation of the ward level plan. The councillor can resolve that he or she will never use the veto power. The councillor can engage with experts and consult widely on standing committee deliberations. Share the discussions and what has happened in the council with people. After all, nothing should be kept secret. Let people know what is being discussed in the council. The councillor can subject to regular social audit, ensure transparent inspections of works undertaken in the local area. And a very important thing, this is very important, a councillor can encourage revenue collection with a view to funding the ward level plan too. In my previous presentation, we had a very vigorous discussion on this issue last Tuesday. There is a study report that was commissioned by the 4th State Finance Corporation in Karnataka, in Bangalore, which shows that the Bangalore City Corporation probably collects at best 20% of its revenue potential. Just 20% of its revenue potential. The Bangalore City Corporation every year produces a budget, and we have tracked it. My presentations are available. We've tracked it from 12/13 onwards to date. Every year it produces a budget estimate and falls short of achieving that budget estimate by a minimum of 30%. Except for 1 year, and that 1 year there was no elected board. Except for 1 year in the last 7 years, we have exceeded, there's been a shortfall of meeting the Bangalore Corporation budget by 30%. In 1 year, it was as high as 67%. Now, that's not the way you do a budget. And the tragedy is that if we collected property tax, and property tax is the biggest tax, last year, the year before last, the target for property tax was 3,500 crore, if I'm not mistaken, and we collected only 2,100 crore. But even with the minimum, shall I say, a minimum level of organization, by just going and covering the properties that are not covered, it is expected that Bangalore City's corporation's property tax revenue could rise by 5 times. So we are talking about a rise to 10,000 crore, which is today the overall projected budget of Bangalore City Corporation, which has never been achieved. Last year, we declared a budget of 11,000 crore and we achieved 7,000 crore because we fell short on property taxes by almost 1,000 crore. Of course, all the time the alibi is, oh, money does not come from the state government, money does not come from the central government. That's true. That's true. But the fact of the matter is that if you collected your own property tax, you wouldn't care less about whether the money is coming from the central government. In fact, your prestige will increase. And that is dependent upon the councillor. Today, the councillor is more interested in expenditures rather than revenue, because expenditures does not build accountability. But if you collect revenue and then you spend that revenue in the name of the people, people who have paid 10 rupees of property tax will come and question you about 100 rupees of expenditure. You set a virtuous cycle going where people's participation improves because their monetary stake is very obvious. Hey, listen, I have paid 2,000 rupees property tax. What is happening to this money? And I will be motivated to demand. So this is a very important point. And this is not, by the way, in the realm of fantasy. I have worked as Rural Development Secretary in Karnataka. In Karnataka, in 2002, a property tax drive was launched. And the property tax those days for all the 5,000 Gram Panchayats in Karnataka was of the range of 55 crore. It was a demand of 80 crore and the collection was 55 crore. And there were about 60 lakh properties which were assessed to tax. When the drive was completed, 60 lakh properties became 1 crore properties. Today it is in excess of 2.5 crore properties. And today the property tax that is collected is in excess of 300 crore. And I still think that Karnataka is underperforming on the rural side. So if this can happen in rural areas, there is absolutely no reason why it cannot happen in Bangalore City. In rural areas, the champion panchayats did it not because of officers. They did it because elected panchayat representatives overcame the trust deficit and they were able to convince people to pay property taxes because the people began to realize if they pay tax, they get double the benefit in return because government money would be added and work would be undertaken transparently and honestly. I am sure this virtuous cycle can happen in Bangalore City also. Or the corporator can become a devil. The corporator can become a devil, use corrupt means in the elections, including excessive expenditure, bribing of voters, appoint or recommend cronies and relatives as area sabha and ward committee meetings. It's happened. These are things that have happened. Irregular and symbolic meetings of the ward committee. They call the ward committee meeting, nobody is there, they write up some minutes and they threaten or even use the veto power. No transparency in implementation of the ward level plan. The Aam Aadmi Party has produced a beautiful handbook. Dr. Renuka Vishwanathan, who is leading the Bangalore Dialogues, and Genesia, who is right here, and Kalyani, all of them have come together and produced a beautiful ward level handbook which can be used to get a snapshot of what is happening. And the tragedy is that even with that ward level handbook, you get a reasonable idea of the finances of projects at a ward level. A lot more transparency needs to be there, but you try and go and search for details of works and you hit a dead end. And this is where a councillor can absolutely change things, but no councillor wants to do it at the moment. They want it to remain non-transparent. And the councillors can also misuse standing committee membership to extort bribes from officers or departments concerned. These are all huge problems with the corporator as devil. One of the biggest problems about the corporator as devil is that the corporator is manipulated by close relatives. So there are many places where the corporator is supposed to be there, but you cannot meet the corporator because the corporator's spouse is standing there. The corporator's spouse is the de facto corporator, and people accept it, which is really crazy. Now, if you elect a corporator, this particularly happens in women's case. I may sound sexist, but I am not. Sadly, this is the fact. But in rural areas, you can see the change happening. You can see that women come, stand for elections, and they become assertive, and they slowly create their identities and they push away their relatives. Sadly, it is not happening in urban areas, because every time what happens is when the rotations of reservations happen, people in political parties get their wives nominated. Many political parties have very capable women in them. And the AAP, of course, has plenty of capable women here. But the point is that in other parties, the capable women are not given the positions, and the wives of influential men are given positions, and then the men stand in for their wives. This is what is happening. This has been documented, sadly, including in places like Karnataka. The cooperator could interfere in contracts and transfers and don't disclose interest while participating in decisions. They can engage in horse trading to pull on elected bodies or elected work, and they can neglect the council work. You know, we do not have adequate quality discussion on the BBMP budget in the council. The mayor gets up and announces a fictitious budget. He says, I'm going to spend 11,000 crore. Everybody claps. And what do they say? They say, sir, please add my work. Please add this work. Please add that work. That's it. Nobody asks the question. Last year, sir, you announced, or not you, because you've changed. The previous mayor announced a budget of 11,000 crore, and we only got 7,000 crore. Why? What happened? What happened to your 11,000 crore? Why did it not come? Who are you going to hold responsible? That kind of quality analysis doesn't happen in the council work, where everybody is basically trying to get or negotiate their works. But how do we change this? It all depends on what you want as a voter. If you want a candidate, or even if you want to stand for election, if others want you to come there to deliver these things, this is probably the best chance for you to cause a change. Prithvi, who is a convener for the AAP in Karnataka, has told me something that constantly sticks in my mind. He says, you know, if you want to win an election in Bangalore, you need to get 10,000 votes in a ward. That's it. If you get 10,000 votes in a ward, you won. That's the arithmetic. Now, the arithmetic is very, 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 sad, because there are so many more people, but nobody votes. But that's a different issue. The simple empirical fact is, if you get 10,000 votes, you can get elected. So if 10,000 people are able to be influenced to believe that they can get a better future by electing the right person, all the things that I mentioned here, the cooperator as an angel, is going to happen. I will end my presentation by saying one thing, that we can average out things and say things are bad. It's always bad. We average it out. But instead of averaging out performance, if you do a frequency distribution, you take 6,000 panchayats in Karnataka, and because I work with the panchayats and I know them well, I'm very fond of working with the panchayats. A lot of my friends are in panchayats. You will find that even the average is dismal. If you do a frequency analysis between panchayats and look at certain characteristics of good performance, you will find 10%, 15%, 20% of the panchayats in Karnataka, anything from 1,000 to 1,200 panchayats in Karnataka, in spite of the dismal political climate, are doing very well. Why? Why are they doing very well? And they don't have any dependencies on the others. They're collecting their tax. They're doing everything that I mentioned here. So if 1,200 panchayats in Karnataka can do outstanding work, why can't we change Bangalore City Corporation? We are talking about a city corporation that has a greater population than Switzerland. I teach in Switzerland. Switzerland has got only 8 million people. Bangalore has now got 10 million people. And Switzerland with 8 million people has got 26 states, cantons, and 5,500 communes, which are panchayats. That is the granularity of division and the intensity of governance there. We can do it because we have more or less the same numbers. If we consider our area sabhas to be communes and our zones to be, or couple of wards put together as a canton. So you can create that intensity of good governance and cause a dramatic change if the cooperator can become an angel. But if the cooperator has to be an angel and not a devil, it ultimately depends on what you want as a candidate or you want as a vote. I'd stop here, and I would just only show this, that as far as absolute devils and absolute angels are concerned, nobody is an absolute devil, nobody is an absolute angel. Most people are confused. In fact, people might start off being devils and they become angels, but it all depends upon the incentive structure and the disincentive structures. So the incentive structure is that you can get re-elected, you can rise to other political positions, and you can actually deliver good services in that area. And if the people of the area believe that they can deliver that incentive to the corporator, I don't think this is a situation that is so hopeless. So if we go beyond looking at averages and actually looking at the potential of what a councillor can do, I think the councillor's potential is tremendous in Bangalore, notwithstanding many of the faults in the law that I perceive today. Thank you very much. We can take questions now.
Thank you, Raghunandan sir. It was quite a session, and I think there is a lot of insight that was shared, and there are already a lot of questions that are asked in the chat box. So for the convenience and managing the time, please, I request everybody, if you have any questions, please put it out in the chat box there, and I'll go one by one, and Raghu sir will answer. Suresh Rathod wants to know, does mayor has any administrative powers to sign or approve any file?
The mayor has the powers to approve on file. The mayor has powers to approve on file, but when it comes to day-to-day activities, a lot of this work is actually delegated and taken up by the standing committee chairpersons. Because the standing committee chairpersons are quite powerful in themselves.
Okay. And Prakash Nedungadi is asking, is there a link between the revenue collected in a ward and the amount spent in that ward?
No, sadly no.
Is there any incentive for corporator to, work on improving the revenue collections?
Sadly no. Sadly no. This has been a long-standing battle. Very, very early. I think it was even prior to 2000, or just after 2000. There was an effort done by an NGO where they went down. Those were heady days, because SM Krishna those days was actually opening up avenues for inviting people from the private sector to come and work with the government. And in Vasant Nagar ward, an effort was made to actually assess the revenue potential. People went house to house and assessed the revenue potential, and they went to the BBMP with a simple proposition saying that, listen, we can increase the property tax in this area without increasing the rates, but just by proper assessment and proper coverage of all the houses. But the incentive should be that 30% of this money should come back to the ward to be spent by the ward committees. There were no ward committees at that point, but the whole idea was to package it in such a way to say that, this can be a positive win-win thing. The BBMP will get a greater share, and the local people can get a greater budget. The whole thing was taken and put into a shredder by the administrators of the BBMP. Very sad. I must say that sometimes, those days particularly, now people are probably a little different. But unfortunately, many of my colleagues were quite skeptical about this whole idea of people's participation, which I thought was a very unimaginative way of looking at it. But this has been tried in the past. You see, how I would envisage this to grow, it would be as follows: that we must have a system by which some percentage, maybe we start with 20%, 25% of the money coming back to the ward to be used. But we must also not increase it beyond a point. The reason is that, you have a core area of Bangalore, which is the old BMP. And you have this peripheral area of Bangalore, which is where I live, which is actually adding a lot of value to Bangalore city. There's tremendous revenue potential where I live, which is along the ring road or beyond the ring road. But the facilities in these areas are not that commensurate with the kind of revenues that are generated or generatable in these areas. So there will be a bit of redistribution that is involved, and some people will say, "Oh no, we don't want to give money to a poor ward. Why should our money go there?" and so on and so forth. And some wards will not have the ability to raise the kind of revenues that that are required for the development of that ward. So you will have deficit wards, you will have surplus wards. Some extent, I would say you start with 20% of the budget coming back as a way to kickstart this whole process of participatory budgeting. But of course, the whole point is if you have 10,000 crore budget, you should be able to meet everybody's demands.
Right.
This is Dr. Radhakrishnan here. Can I make a point?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So the benefit of everybody here, this is regarding ward committees, and like Raghu sir said, ward committees largely have been puppets in the hands of the corporator. 3 years ago, two of us went to court on a PIL, filed a PIL on potholes in roads. And we got a very interesting interim order on that PIL. And the PIL goes to state that roads which include footpaths should be kept obstacle free and should be safe for users. And it is the responsibility of the ward committee, the corporator and the local engineer to go and inspect roads and ensure quality and obstacle free nature of these roads and footpaths. So what we have done in Ward 151 is we've picked 3 roads as an example. We have actually written to the local BBMP engineer, who is the secretary of the ward committee, and we have individually sent letters to each ward committee member enclosing the interim order, and we've told them that if we don't make footpaths in these roads obstacle free, we will sue them with contempt of court individually. People can reach out to me if they want more information on that, but that order is a great order for us to ensure that the ward committee listens to us.
Yeah, on the accounting system, and then I'll go back to women's representation. On the accounting system, I agree with you, ma'am. The system has actually deteriorated, and it is a shameful thing for a city like Bangalore, where we claim to have such great IT expertise that the BBMP accounts are in a shambles. You know, just to give you what Basuraj was explaining, my wife and I have been doing detailed analysis of the BBMP budget year to year. So we've got data from 2012 to date. You know, it takes anything from 14 to 18 months to get the expenditure details of a particular year. So the budget for 2018-19 was revised in July 19, 3 months after the year was over. And the expenditure for 1920 in July 1920 has still not been determined. The 1920-21 budget has been declared, but the expenditure of the previous year is unknown, and we will know after 1 year. How can they do this? I just don't understand, because they say they have voucher level accounting. They say the whole thing has been computerized. They started computerization when BATF was there. I think it's a deliberate ploy. It's deliberate.
Yes, very much so.
Deliberate, and we probably need to go to court to get this done. That we need to go to court to get even a simple housekeeping matter like accounting to be done properly. And now to come back to Basuraj's point about women proxies, husbands being proxies for women. You know, when this is studied in rural areas, it was discovered that in the initial years, when reservation was started, there was a predominant system where husbands began to step in and become proxies for their wives. But also another very interesting phenomenon was seen, that if you try to, I used to make this mistake of telling the husbands of women who came for training, to get out of the training hall. And then the women came and told me, please don't talk like that to our husbands, because, we get hell at home after that. So the relationship has been managed in a way that the husbands don't feel insecure. Men have very fragile egos. And we need to manage the egos of men, sadly.
Not fragile,
So
big ego, not fragile.
What I find is that every time that a fresh election happens, women are getting, shall I say, there is less and less of this. So I think the phase of democracy growing. But the point about the Aam Aadmi Party is that I can guarantee you that in the Aam Aadmi Party, there are not going to be any proxies participating. Every person in the Aam Aadmi Party is somebody who's been here because they really understand understand what a party stands for, and there's not going to be this kind of symbolic representation. That is for sure.
Pushpa speaking. I just wanted to ask a question which is related to this. Can I, Mr. Raghunandan?
Yeah, ma'am, quickly.
Hello.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, actually, at the ward meetings where the wife, the lady is the corporator, several times because I had made a noise about it at the meetings which I attended, her husband was not there, but it was the husband who was really doing all the work. Is there anything that we can work towards bringing a law so that they cannot have proxies? I mean, this is something we've been talked about a lot, but can we actually do something practically to take care of this? And the other aspect is, at these meetings, I have brought up certain issues like the roads needing to be done in our layout. And each time note is made in the assistance, ward corporator's assistance book, and they say yes, 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 yes. And several months pass and it's not done. Is there anywhere where we can appeal to see that the corporator does these works? Because after some time it lapses, the time is passed and it doesn't happen at all. Can you tell me on these two aspects, please?
Raghunandan, so before you answer that, I'll just club a couple of other questions which are on a similar notes. Purnima Rao, she is asking, what are our options on how to deal with the devil who has gone against every wish of a neighborhood? Basically, I mean, I think she is offering, obviously referring to the corporator who is not working in, in the interest of the people. So is there anything that people can do once they're elected, or voting after 5 years is the only option? So this ward committee enforcements, I mean, can the ward committees, have a way in, or is the corporator only medium to communicate things, or the ward committees have other ways to get their things?
Let me answer the first question about how you can change the devils who are members. See, today the ward committees are the only route of doing this, and there are many number of civil society organizations which have fought to reach this position. So instead of being despondent, I think we need to be conscious of the fact that without civil society support, we would not have come this far. And the High Court has also pushed. In fact, there's a very long history of how the High Court has pushed ward committees to this point. And last year, after ward committees were mandated by the High Court, because they were not conducted, the BBMP was fined 50,000 rupees. The commissioner was fined 50,000 rupees, and the commissioner collected that money from all the corporators and paid the fine to the High Court. So slowly, pressure is building up to hold regular ward committee meetings. Please crowd the ward committee meetings, because ward committee meetings are open to the public. They are open to the public. So you have to keep fighting every way, every which way. So first you have to find out when the ward committee meetings are going to happen. Crowd into the ward committee meetings. 40 people, 50 people, please go. Because if you go there, then the corporator will soon get used to the fact that his ward committee meetings are open to the public. But today that is a very, formally that is a very potent mechanism, but practice makes perfect. Democracy is all about continuously creating situations where the imperfect is, weeded out. So you have to keep going to the ward committees. I strongly feel that the veto power is a very regressive provision, and there is a move to go to the court to declare it as violative of Article 14 of the Constitution. So let us see what the public interest litigations lead to. But there is a move today to say that this veto power is regressive and it is ultra vires the Constitution itself.
Right. The next question is from Ziaulak. He asks I think it's compensation or the salaries that councillors and the mayor get. Is it possible to sustain without being corrupt?
No, that is again a big problem. I mean, this is a real problem because, in rural areas, I was involved in a study in Kolar district, and we found that, elected representatives are also victims of circumstances. You see, if you are elected, and I've seen this in rural areas, if you are elected, the ordinary task of meeting people come to your house, you have to give them a chai. Somebody's house burns down, you give them 200 rupees. Somebody's pension papers are stuck, So you take an auto rickshaw and go into the to the city to get something done. That's what you're doing. You're doing a lot of informal work. We found out that people spend legitimately on government work 20,000 rupees every month in a rural area. 20,000 rupees is spent in a rural area on legitimate government work, but the government gives you a 3,000 rupees sitting fee. How do they make up the difference? I found a self-help group woman. She's borrowed money. She's borrowed money to do government work. So there's a lot of need-based corruption as opposed to greed-based corruption. And I am a votary of paying legislators generously. People criticize the Aam Aadmi Party saying, "Oh, you have increased the pay for MLAs." Yeah, but you don't get corrupt MLAs. In Singapore, the ministers are the highest paid. Ministers are paid better than corporate salaries. But then if you're corrupt, then you should be hanged. So the point is that I do believe that the corporators' honorarium is too low. They should be given a reasonable compensation of 50 to 60,000 rupees minimum, and then we should be very, very tough on them. But if you raise 10,000 crores by way of property tax, you'll be able to do it. You can calculate the cost of running a legitimate corporator's office, and you should be able to pay for it. See, I think that you should bring all money, all costs above the table. And let's give up this notion of people not incurring costs. Poor people get elected. Otherwise, you're saying this is only for rich people. Only rich people, crorepati, should stand for election and get elected because they are people of means. That's not representative democracy, in my opinion.
Right, thank you. So the next question I have is, if the elections are not held by the end of this term because of COVID and other reasons, what will be the status? Will the councillors continue or commissioners take over, or what is the modus
It's
operandi in
anybody's
such a
guess
situation?
because the Constitution does not give you any leeway. Come hell or high water, tsunami, earthquake, the Constitution does not give an exception. It says that the term of the corporation shall be 5 years and no more. The word used in the Constitution is "and no more." And there's been a 5-judge constitutional bench decision taken in the case of Ahmedabad municipality, which was postponed by the state government. In 2006, the Ahmedabad municipality elections were postponed, and somebody went to court, and 5 judges of the Supreme Court said there is no way that you can postpone the elections. So the Supreme Court has held at least in 4 to 5 cases. I myself filed a PIL at one stage in Karnataka when Panchayat elections were postponed, and I argued the case in the High Court myself because I'm a lawyer. On the evening of my argument, the government declared the elections because there is no way that you can postpone the elections. But you and I know that the COVID situation comes once in a century. Who would have thought of COVID or any such pandemic when the Constitution was written? So, I would say, okay, I mean, this is a really exceptional situation, so maybe you should postpone. So I would say, continue the existing body. In fact, in rural areas, this is exactly what has happened. We were all debating what to do in rural areas, and we suggested to the government that they should continue the existing body. What the government has gone and done is they've appointed a new body, appointed individually without any elections. They have selected people and put them there. And I know for a fact that there are people in the government of Karnataka who are objecting to it and saying it's completely wrong. It creates a wrong precedent. So it's going to be a tricky thing. I would say, given the situation and given that we are all reasonable people, we understand that, in these times of social distancing, it will be difficult to conduct an election. Continue the existing body for 6 months. It would be the right way. But please remember that the Constitution actually doesn't allow you to continue even for a day. The next body should be elected within the 5 years and in the seat on the end of 5 years. And in Karnataka, we have broken that rule every time. Since 1994, every time the elections have been postponed. We are a very bad advertisement for regular elections to the panchayats and municipalities.
Okay. So in the interest of time, I think we have almost answered all of the questions. Raghunandan sir is always available with us. So if you have any questions, you can get in touch with either Janisha or myself or through our Facebook pages. or call us through our missed call number, and we'll always get in touch with you. Prithvi Reddy sir, if you can give some concluding remarks before Shantalaji ends the meeting.
Hey, Raghu sir, thank you so much for the enlightening talk. I think the answer is very clear that where there is a will, there is a way. That if a corporator does want to be an angel, there is nothing in the law that restricts him from doing so. And I think for many of us who are determined to fix Bangalore, your talk was very, very important, and I look forward to a lot more people participating. Thank you so much, Raghu.
Thank you, Prithvi. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you all for for attending, and Genesia is going to post a link. Please give your feedback on this session, as well as if you'd like to know if you'd like to attend more sessions. Please indicate on that form as well. Genesia has just posted on the chat window. And thank you, Raghu sir. It was really very enlightening to hear so much about duties of corporator and what they can do as an angel and what first they can do also, so that we can try and avoid. I mean, we have to. There are so many corporators who are devils right now. I guess there are angels also, but we want to make sure all the 198 corporators are angels next time. So it's in citizens' hands. Thank you all for attending, and please keep in touch. And there will be another session on BBMP budget very soon. We will be announcing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shantala. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for.
Thank you so much.
Successful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Basaraj. Thank you, Shantala.
Thanks, sir.